Every Quirk in My Hero Academia, Part 2. A Quirk, formerly known as a meta ability, is a superhuman ability that a person can possess. Along with being unique to each user, Quirks are sorted into multiple categories. Quirk users are also limited to one ability and are thus unable to achieve any other. About 80% of the population can utilize a Quirk. A Quirk is innate to the Quirk holder's body. It can also be referred to as an individuality. In some exceptionally rare cases, animals can also develop Quirks. Welcome to the Amagi. In today's video, we're going over every Quirk in My Hero Academia Part 2. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Cell Activation. Cell Activation is the Quirk used by 9, Katsuma Shimano, and the latter's father. Cell Activation allows its user to activate the cells in their body or another person's body through touch. This increases regeneration, recovery time, and can even improve physical condition. This Quirk drains the user's stamina when activated, and continued usage can cause fatigue. The Quirk also can't be activated on certain people depending on their blood type, although Katsuma's version of the Quirk didn't seem to have this drawback. Cemedine. Cemedine is the Quirk used by Kojiro Bondo. Cemedine allows Kojiro to spray a glue-like liquid from holes in his head. Once it hits something, the glue will either harden up and trap whatever it makes contact with, or make it sticky and dangerous to touch. Kojiro can also adjust the speed at which his glue dries. Acid is able to dissolve it. Cement. Cement is the Quirk used by Cementos. Cement gives Ken the ability to manipulate cement-based materials simply by being in contact with the surface. It does not give him the ability to create new cement, he can only reshape existing cement. Concrete can be molded into any shape he desires, no matter in what state or form it's found, and he's free to weaponize said material as long as he keeps touching it. In the right conditions, even those with enough power to destroy concrete may easily get overwhelmed by cement. Because of the nature of this Quirk, Ken has a large combat advantage in urban areas, where concrete is abundant. In the anime, Ken's hands appear to glow a faint green light whenever he's using cement. During combat, Ken uses cement both for offense and defense, materializing huge walls of concrete to surround and trap enemies within. With cement, Ken can create all sorts of structures for others to work with, such as Gym Gamma and the arena used for the fighting portion of the UA Sports Festival. Ken is seemingly able to build complex constructs in a matter of minutes, showcasing expert skills over his Quirk. Centipede. Centipede is the Quirk used by Juzo Moashi. Centipede grants Juzo long centipede-like limbs, arms, legs, and head. He can also use his Quirk to attack or restrain enemies from afar. With the exception of his head, his centipede limbs are usually hidden within his clothes. Additionally, Juzo's pincers are venomous, which can cause intense pain in the victim. Chameleon. Chameleon is the Quirk used by Invisible Wall. Chameleon grants its user the physical appearance and abilities of a chameleon. In addition to a chameleon-like appearance, the user is able to stick and climb on walls, rotate their eyes in multiple directions, and stretch out their long tongue. The user can also camouflage their entire body, which can be used to evade opponents and conduct surprise attacks. While the camouflage granted by the Quirk is useful, in a similar case to Suyu Asui's camouflage, it can be spotted by keen-eyed individuals. Charging Muscles. Charging Muscles is the Quirk used by Muscle Man. Charging Muscles allows Muscle Man to charge up strength in his muscles, enhancing the strength of an attack in a powerful blow. If Muscle Man overcharges his muscles, it can lead to extreme muscle soreness. Chart. Chart is the unnamed Quirk used by Kashiko Sekigai. Chart allows Kashiko to create a holographic page that allows her to track and detect enemies. This allows her to observe the person in action whom she's tracking. She also knows how far away they are and if they're alive. Chest Hair. Chest Hair is the Quirk used by Tenma Nakaoji. Not much is known about Chest Hair, but due to the nature of the Quirk, it presumably enhances Tenma's masculine traits. Chimera. Chimera is the Quirk used by Chojuro-kan. Chojiro's Quirk grants him the characteristics of various animals. He can also enlarge his animal traits to monstrous proportions, granting him a tremendous boost in strength and durability. Chojiro's main and permanent form seems to be a blue werewolf. He can also gain the characteristics of birds, lizards, and even a dragon, as seen when he expels fire from his mouth. The fire can also be shot in the form of a large beam of energy. Chronostasis. Chronostasis is the quirk used by Hari Kurono. Chronostasis grants Hari arrow-shaped hair that can extend itself in a straight line and cut others, slowing down targets if hit. The minute hand is located at the front of his hair, above the forehead. The hour hand is located on the back of his head, around the nape. The duration of the slowdown effect correlates to the unit of time represented by the hitting hair arrow. Hari is incapable of using his quirk while in motion, so he needs to remain motionless for his hair to extend. Clean Bubbler. Clean Bubbler is the quirk used by Susuku Mitorai. This quirk allows the user to create and control soapy water from their body. The stream is strong enough to keep several people in the air. The user can also use the quirk to generate large soap bubbles from his inner tank that can be used to envelop targets and make them float. Wash can also use the bubbles to disinfect and aid the wounds of the injured, as it was seen when he helped the wounded after a clash between civilians and villains to tend to the injured. Cleaning. Cleaning is the quirk used by Zookeeper. Cleaning allows Zookeeper to create a dish soap-like substance from her body that allows her to weaken or negate the quirks of others by brushing or cleaning them with it. She can also use her quirk to clean up bloodstains and fingerprints from crime scenes. Clones. Clones is the quirk used by Ectoplasm. Clones allows Ectoplasm to release a viscous substance from his mouth and shape it into clones of himself. By vomiting what appears to be a glowing fluid, Ectoplasm can create up to 30 clones at a time with the fluid, 36 if he's in a good mood. The clones are capable of taking on a fair amount of enemies or overwhelming a small group of them due to the obvious advantage in numbers. Ectoplasm is also able to dispel his clones willingly if he needs to. Ectoplasm and his clones also appear to share the same mind, as the original is shown to be aware of what his duplicates witness even if he's at a long distance from them. The clones are each capable of speech as well, making it possible for Ectoplasm to communicate through them. The clones themselves can be destroyed with one strong blow. Ectoplasm's quirk is useful for activities or operations that require a large number of people. This makes him one of UA's most efficient teachers, since the clones give him a method to look for each student individually. Ectoplasm also acts as a competent vigilance system, using his doubles to patrol a vast area. Ectoplasm can generate a massive clone, but doing so won't allow him to generate any more smaller ones. This giant clone is able to trap people on or in its body, preventing them from moving. Cloud. Cloud was the quirk used by Oboro Shirakumo, and later formed the base of Kurogiri's quirk Warp Gate. Cloud allowed Oboro to create several different sized clouds, dense enough to be touched and even to hold up the weight of one or several people. These clouds could float in the air, so Oboro was capable of moving through the air by riding on them at great speed. The clouds could even store objects inside themselves. When Oboro's corpse was stolen by All For One to be transformed into Kurogiri by Kyudai Garaki, the quirk factor underwent numerous modifications, as it became the base for what would become Kurogiri's Warp Gate. That quirk generates a dark fog that acts as a portal, but does not appear to retain the abilities of the original quirk. Oboro generally used his quirk to move around, and thanks to the fact that the clouds can fly, he could easily overcome any obstacle. This allowed him, for example, to enter a building through the windows located in upper floors without problems, as he did to enter his class at UA, or when he infiltrated with Midnight into the room where the robber villain held several hostages. While facing a foe, the ability to fly and the great speed of the clouds gave Oboro great maneuverability, since it allowed him to dodge the enemy's attacks and strike him from blind angles by surprise. He could also generate billows to block the enemy's vision, or create a number of clouds to hide in one of them, using his gourd-like speaker to confuse the enemy, making him attack a cloud that he's not in order to later ambush him from another. The density of the clouds also allowed him to use his quirk to shield people under them, as he did to protect a group of nursery kids from the debris of a falling building. Comic. Comic is the quirk used by Manga Fukidashi. Comic allows manga to materialize onomatopoeia into the real world in the form of giant Japanese letters by speaking them. The onomatopoeia is manifested with the same effects as the sound they're based on. This grants manga excellent versatility, as he's capable of conjuring various effects just by spelling the right wording. The onomatopoeia that have been shown so far were kaboom, bang, blam, bonk. creates huge sturdy letters that crash through an area and function as a wall. Damp creates letters that act as a humidifier. Boing creates bouncy letters that can rebound projectiles. Manga's Quirk makes his entire head look like an actual comic book speech bubble, which also affects his height. Using comic too much and in rapid succession will eventually cause Manga's throat to become sore, limiting his actions. Compress. Compress is the quirk possessed by Atsuhiro Sako. Compress allows Atsuhiro to shrink anything down inside a spherical area into a small marble without actually damaging it. To activate his quirk, Atsuhiro first needs to touch the target with his hand. This will result in the target getting shrunk down into a minuscule marble-like object. Compress will affect anything that's found within a specific range of space around the intended target. The weight of the compressed objects is reduced considerably, making it possible to hide or carry them around. Atsuhiro is able to cancel his quirk's effect on a single marble by wishing it or all his marbles at the same time by snapping his fingers, which causes the targets to turn back to their normal size alongside everything that was captured with them. When used on a person, Compress effectively entraps them, terminating the fight in an instant and letting Atsuhiro abduct them easily. This is particularly useful against opponents who are resistant to certain forms of attack, such as Snatch. Atsuhiro has shown the ability to compress even his own body if needed, as long as he's within the area being compressed down. Atsuhiro's quirk factor lies within his arms, and after losing his left arm to Overhaul, Compress's activation is now limited to his right arm. Being a former stage magician, he employs several tricks in combination with his quirk in order to mislead his opponents. Thanks to his amazing stealth and agility, he can capture people within compressed marbles without causing noise, and before the victim alerts nearby allies. For the same reasons, Compress is very useful for transporting downed allies. Atsuhiro is exceptionally cautious with his captives, utilizing his illusionist skills to sneakily create decoy marbles and swap them around with the ones holding the actual targets, thus deceiving anybody who attempts to steal from him. Compress comes in handy when it comes to laying traps. If Atsuhiro has some marbles containing compressed objects, it's possible for him to use those as a way to obstruct the path of enemies, after throwing said marbles in their direction and making them grow back to their normal size. Thanks to his creativity and ingenuity, he's able to take advantage of the canceling property of his quirk to affect the environment around him, like placing a marble holding a compressed large rock below a car and then launching the vehicle into mid-air through the marble's uncompression process. Compress can also be used to trap people along with environmental hazards, as demonstrated by the murder of Snatch, where he was compressed into Dabi's cremation fire. Compress can also be used offensively on its own by selectively compressing only one part of a person's body, as compressing only Overhaul's left arm causes it to be forcibly torn away from him. Confession. Confession is the quirk used by Shin Nemoto. After asking a question, Confession allows the user to force the victim to answer truthfully. With this quirk, the user can learn the true thoughts, secrets, intentions, and feelings of allies and enemies alike, allowing for information gathering, psychological torture, and prevention of betrayal. The usefulness of this power has apparently made Overhaul value Shin the most out of all the members of the 8 Bullets. It's worth noting, however, that his quirk is very literal. When Himiko Toga and Jin Bubaigawara were asked if they were told to betray Overhaul, they said no, as they had simply been told to remember that the Shi Hasakai were beneath them. Their later betrayal of the Yakuza organization was due to their own desires to avenge Magna. Confession doesn't have any offensive capabilities, so the user has to rely on other methods to fight directly. Also, given Confession requires both the user and the target to be oral, this quirk is ineffective if either of them is incapable of speaking. Shin uses this quirk to learn of information that Overhaul wanted to know, as well as checking to make sure that no one had any intention of betraying the Shi Hasakai. In battle, he plays on people's emotions by forcing them to admit things that they're not proud of. Control Horn. Control Horn is the unnamed quirk possessed by Cow Cowboy. Control Horn allows Cow Cowboy to mind control cows. He's seen controlling hundreds of them at a time, as he was threatening to stampede a whole province of Japan if his demands were not met. It appears that Cow Cowboy needs both horns intact for his quirk to work, as when All Might chops one off, it stopped working. Copy. Copy is the quirk used by Nieto Monoma. Copy allows Nato to utilize a quirk after coming into contact with its respective user. Nato only needs to touch as little as a few strands of hair from the target in order for his quirk to take effect. After contact with a target is made, Nato gains full access to their quirk, at least at a basic level. It's unknown if Nato is also capable of copying further improvements that one may achieve with their quirk. Copying multiple quirks at once is possible as well. Nato can hold up to a certain amount of copied quirks within his body, depending on how much he trains his quirk. The effects of the copied quirks, save for those that physically change the structure of his body, will continue to remain active even if Nato switches out the associated quirk. With a copied quirk, Nato essentially possesses the same advantages and disadvantages of the original quirk user after he copied from it, although his ability to swap between quirks makes him a more versatile and unpredictable opponent to deal with in group battles, where he has more opportunities to copy numerous different quirks, be it from friend or foe. There are a number of drawbacks to copy. This quirk requires Nato to make physical contact with another quirk user for it to function in the first place. He's unable to activate more than one copied quirk simultaneously, which means he must actively switch between them on the fly. Nato has a time limit of how long he's able to keep a copied quirk stored within his body, which was initially stated to be 5 minutes. However, Nato appears to have improved his limit, stating that copied quirks now last up to 10 minutes. After this limit is up, Nato loses access to the copied quirk until he makes contact with its original user again. While Nato is capable of copying any quirk, those that depend on accumulated resources as a prerequisite to function can't be used as intended, since Nato is only able to copy the quirks themselves, with no way to instantly replicate any additional attributes or conditions they need to work properly. This means, for example, that he's incapable of tapping into One For All's strength, as it is the result of power that has been passed down and multiplied over the course of decades thanks to its stockpiling trait. He's also hindered by the natural limits of his own physical body. While he can properly adapt quirks that specifically augment his body in some way, such as Hardening's defense boost and Explosion's immunity to the blasts it creates, he would not instantly have the strength necessary to properly handle such powerful quirks that require years of physical conditioning to use without bodily harm, such as One For All. As noted in Nato's backstory, he has a hard time justifying his goal to become a pro hero to other people due to his quirk being useless by itself. As a result, he dismisses conventional heroism and is willing to employ underhanded tricks and tactics in order to gain the upper hand against stronger opponents, especially if it helps them acquire their powers. Nato was able to improve some of Copy's limits since its introduction in the UA Sports Festival. Nato is capable of holding up to 4 or more quirks at once instead of 3, an assumed number going by the amount of watches he carries around on his hero costume, which, as a result of this, is something that Nato is capable of exploiting in order to deceive observant enemies. Nato seems to instinctively know how to utilize a copied quirk, even if it's his first time seeing it. So far, Nato has been shown copying the following quirks: Explosion, Hardening, Scales, Solid Air, Poltergeist, Size, Brainwashing, presumably, One For All, failed usage due to lack of necessary resources, Twin Impact, Rewind, failed usage due to lack of necessary resources, Fat Absorption, visual example, and Half Cold, Half Hot. Cow. Cow is the quirk used by Cow Lady. Cow allows the user to alter their body with the characteristics of a cow. This includes hooves, horns, and the skin of a cow. This increases the user's speed and strength relative to that of a cow. Creation. Creation is the quirk used by Momo Yaoyorozu. Creation allows Momo to materialize different objects, such as weapons and tools, from any part of her body. Apart from living things, Momo has the potential to replicate virtually any object, no matter how complex or advanced its structure may be. She only requires to understand the atomic configuration of said object in order to reproduce it. She first imagines the necessary parts, followed by the materials, then the assembling process, and finally the coding. Momo's creations emerge from her body with a blue and pink glow and are otherwise no different from the regular objects they're based off, though she can customize these materials that form their composition, giving them whole new properties. Momo doesn't necessarily have to completely dispense a creation from her body either, having the choice to materialize only half or more of its functional structure, while the rest remains within her person. This is useful for situations where she has to quickly maneuver said creation or herself around, or if both her hands are currently occupied with some other task. Momo's body breaks down fat at a molecular level, which can then be reused as a material for her to shape into objects with her quirk. Because of this, a considerable ingestion of food is necessary for creation to be effective. Momo needs time to both make and use her objects. Tokoyami defeats her in the sports festival by having Dark Shadow attack her continuously, giving her no time to think or go on the offensive herself. The amount of objects that Momo can create depends on both the amount of lipids that she has in her body, as well as the size and complexity of the objects she creates. Spending more lipids, the more difficult they are. Momo can end up weakened if she's low in fat deposits. In order to effectively create an object, Momo must have a deep understanding and knowledge of its atomic composition, which means she cannot create things she doesn't know how to create down to the atomic level. Momo's first flawless creation was a Russian Matryoshka doll, which she was able to materialize at a very early age after several failed attempts. Because of this, she can generate endless amounts of Matryoshka dolls based on her image almost instinctively, further using those to store other creations of hers inside. Momo prefers close-range combat, quickly producing basic melee weapons such as metal poles and pikes, which she has skill wielding for offense, defense, and support. For long range, she favors cannons of various sizes. Her creations may be further used by her allies, giving them something to defend or help themselves with. Because of her high intelligence, general knowledge about different materials, and quick thinking, Momo is extremely capable of devising plans to solve almost any challenge she faces against, fabricating herself the necessary tools to do so. Larger and/or more sophisticated creations tend to be reserved for situations where Momo has time to prepare a strategy and execute it. She has to leave her body more exposed in those cases to allow room for said creations to arise. Cremation. Cremation is the unnamed quirk possessed by Dabi. Like his father's quirk, Hellflame, Dabi's quirk grants him fire-based abilities, particularly creating and generating fire from his body at will. However, unlike Hellflame, Dabi's are blue in color, meaning that they burn much hotter. The user can ignite blue flame anywhere on their body with minimal effort or movement almost instantaneously. They can also combust anything they touch almost instantly, including robust materials and living creatures alike. For example, by touching a single tree in the beast's forest, Dabi was able to set the majority of the forest ablaze, trapping everyone there in a ring of fire. The flames of this quirk are extremely hot, burning at a temperature of at least 2000 degrees Celsius, which is higher than that of lava and normal fire, signified by its blue coloration. Dabi's flames were hot enough to burn an entire group of villains into ash in mere seconds. They're also quite bright, making them effective against Dark Shadow. His flames are powered by his emotions, seemingly his rage, so the greater his rage, the hotter his flames are. The major drawback of Dabi's ability is that his body can't handle the heat due to inheriting his mother's genes, which grant resistance to freezing temperatures instead of intense heat. Overusing his flames will cause his skin to swell, sizzle, and slowly burn over time. This prevents Dabi from fighting prolonged battles and severely limits his endurance. As stated by him upon overusing his quirk, prolonged usage of it causes him to lose sensation in his body and possibly render himself completely numb. Losing control of his emotions will cause his flames to run wild or ignite hotter than his body can handle. Dabi primarily uses his quirk to fight from a distance and burn his enemies using waves of fire and flamethrowers. He can also release a short burst of flames for roasting his targets at close range. Dabi often relies on the brute force of his powerful quirk to overwhelm his enemies. His fire blasts are powerful enough to collapse building walls and were even enough to completely repel Snatch's quirk. Dabi also uses his quirk tactically, creating walls of fire to trap his targets within a fixed area or to propel himself in midair through the soles of his feet. This quirk also combos well with Compress, as anyone compressed, along with some of Dabi's flames, will burn to death. Because Dabi's flames tend to weaken his body with prolonged use, he's unable to release successive attacks for too long. To counter this, he will often engage in rattling the enemy in order to buy himself some cooldown time. Additionally, Dabi has learned to take some heat off his attacks in order to reserve more power for himself in critical situations. Crystallize. Crystallize is the quirk used by Yu Hojo. Crystallize allows Yu to grow a large number of crystals from his body, completely covering his skin with them. The crystals are shown to be both durable and able to grow near instantaneously. It does not appear to have any limitations to where the crystals can sprout from his body. Yu also possesses the ability to form his crystals into a sword shape that covers his arm in order to extend his reach. Despite their density, the crystals are not unbreakable. Yu also keeps his head shaved so that the crystals can grow smoothly, implying that hair may hinder the crystallization process. The crystals also tear through whatever clothes the user is wearing. According to you, the crystals generated with his quirk do not possess any financial value, which was discovered when somebody tried to salvage these crystals for profit, only to find out they were fake. Curse. Curse is the quirk used by Thousand Eyes. Thousand Eyes' quirk turns their entire body into paper runes. This quirk also makes their body extremely light. Danger Sense. Danger Sense was the quirk used by Hikage Shinomori, the fourth wielder of One for All and later inherited by Izuku Midoriya. This quirk allows the user to detect any potential threats in the surrounding area, thus giving the user the opportunity to properly react to them quickly, similar to a sixth sense. The detection of a threat is described by Izuku as a strong stabbing sensation in his head. According to Izuku, this quirk takes a large toll on the user's body depending on the threat it senses, although this may be a result of the quirk being strengthened by One for All. This drawback doesn't seem to adversely affect him anymore, implying that it can be made mild through training. Sufficiently fast attacks can also prevent the user from being able to properly dodge them, as Izuku was heavily injured by Lady Nagant's bullet despite using Danger Sense. If the user is in no actual danger, such as if their opponents have no true malice and are just trying to help, then the quirk won't be triggered. It's likely that Hikage used this quirk in conjunction with One for All, though his fighting style with Danger Sense currently remains unknown. During the Paranormal Liberation War, after Katsuki Bakugo was injured by Tamura Shigaraki, Deku snaps, manifesting the quirk for the first time, although he would not be aware of it. Later, he would feel the Danger Sense again when Gigantomachia was about to free himself from Best Jeanist wires, but he could not understand the origin of that feeling. Then, after being momentarily knocked out by Dabi's flames, Izuku felt the sharp pain in his head again, finally understanding the reason for it. He remembers the notes All Might had gathered about the previous One for All users and realizes he's awakened this quirk. However, due to the quirk's sudden awakening and his lack of training with Danger Sense, he found it hard to stay conscious with these signals being sent to his brain, though he still forced himself to keep fighting. When Izuku goes into a coma, he meets the predecessors. There, Hikage briefly demonstrates Danger Sense by dodging Daigoro Banjo's Black Whip. During his hunt for the League of Villains, Izuku primarily uses this quirk as a way to track down nearby criminals, sensing the sharp twinge in his head before heading off in the direction of danger. He uses this Danger Sense more effectively in his battle with Muscular, using the quirk and his previous fight with the villain to better dodge his attacks. He uses this quirk again when attempting to flee from Lady Nagant's bullets, but even with the aid of Danger Sense, he's unable to fully evade the bullets and gets injured. Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow is the quirk used by Fumikage Tokoyami. Dark Shadow grants Fumikage a shadowy, monster-like being from within his body that he can materialize and dematerialize at will. Dark Shadow effectively acts as Fumikage's personal guardian, functioning as a living appendage that follows all of its master's commands. It is sentient, capable of speech, and loyally protects its host, regardless of the state it finds itself in. Dark Shadow is always connected to Fumikage's body through an umbilical cord, as described by Shihai Kuroryo, even when it moves far away from him. However, Fumikage does not appear to share the same physical sensations as Dark Shadow, such as pain and weakness, or vice versa, meaning that incapacitating just one of them will not prevent the other from acting out. It is somehow able to communicate with Fumikage telepathically as well. Dark Shadow appears to possess the ability to change shape to some extent, as it can apparently extend the length of its arms and neck if so desired. It's said to be made of dark energy, despite being a solid entity that can interact with the material world, but said energy has a limit, and Dark Shadow will retract into Fumikage's body when said limit runs out. Certain actions can make this energy drain happen faster, like making Dark Shadow take too many opposing hits or having it distance itself too much from Fumikage's body. To recharge Dark Shadow, Fumikage needs to keep it shrouded from any source of light. Dark Shadow's personality and offensive power depend on the surrounding brightness levels. Under strong light, Dark Shadow is small in comparison to when it's engrossed by darkness. Dark Shadow is docile when exposed to light, making it easy for Fumikage to control. However, it's also weaker and therefore less dangerous for the opponent in a fight. Dark Shadow's personality under the influence of darkness is the opposite of when it's exposed to light, becoming far more powerful and vicious while attacking anything that moves or makes sound indiscriminately. The drawback is that Dark Shadow is also more unruly and rebellious, being more difficult for Fumikage to be able to control effectively. According to Meizo Shoji, Fumikage's negative emotions, such as regret and indignation, can intensify this version of Dark Shadow, giving it enough power to defy Fumikage's commands and gradually take over his body with its expanding darkness. Once this happens, Dark Shadow is able to force Fumikage to move around against his will, leaving Fumikage with no control over his body. Fumikage primarily fights from a distance, ordering Dark Shadow to move towards the opponent and fight on his behalf. Whenever he needs to defend himself, Fumikage lets Dark Shadow handle the opposing impacts for him. Dark Shadow also helps him with mobility, giving him or his allies support for climbing structures if necessary. Dark Shadow mostly attacks by stretching or growing both of its arms, using them to grab or slam the adversary while Fumikage stays out of danger. This grants Fumikage a huge advantage in one-on-one battles, to the point of being viewed as almost invincible. Despite his weakness towards the light, Dark Shadow maintains extraordinary defensive skills and can still block light-creating quirks such as explosion or electrification with some efficiency. After his hero work studies with hawks, Fumikage figured out a way to utilize Dark Shadow to simulate flight. As Dark Shadow is always floating and capable of holding its host, Fumikage becomes able to move around mid-air by letting his quirk wrap around his body with its arms and carry him around. Decay. Decay is the quirk used by Tomura Shigaraki. It's the result of a rare mutation that no one was aware of before it manifested, much like Ares Rewind. Decay allows Tomura to destroy anything his hands touch, making it crumble to dust. Whether the target is organic or not, Decay will work without fail. As such, this quirk is extremely lethal against living beings, having their flesh rot away if hit by it. The speed of disintegration is developed from slow to almost immediate, eventually spreading through their whole body if a victim doesn't amputate the decaying body part. Eraserhead was able to avoid this by erasing Decay before it could cause further damage to his flesh. It's also possible for the effect of Decay to spread beyond what the user has touched, creating a domino chain of disintegrated victims. Tomura has had this ability ever since Decay first manifested on him, being strong enough to destroy an entire household, but due to his jumbled up memories of the event, he seemingly forgot about or mentally repressed this specific ability until halfway through the revival celebration, where flashes of his past started reminding him of what happened. At this early point in Tomura's life, Decay's disintegration process was far weaker, as it reduced affected targets down to chunks instead of dust. This quirk is not effective if the user is wearing a pair of gloves. Due to the fact that the user's quirk factor lies within their hands, more specifically their fingers, Tomura would lose the use of Decay if he lost them, similar to Overhaul. Decay first manifested on 5-year-old Tenko as he played with his dog, Mon. Tenko felt a shock through his left arm moments before getting physically punished by his father. While embracing the dog, Decay's effects materialized for the first time, resulting in Tenko accidentally killing his dog, and then later his sister. Eventually, Tenko, who was resentful about his family and in a manic state, destroyed the rest of them as well as their household with his newfound quirk. All for One took advantage of this in order to recruit Tenko, now Tomura, as his pupil and eventual successor when the latter was left alone and confused after the death of his family. With the help of his doctor and assistant, All for One was able to salvage the hands of the family members Tomura killed, using them as a sort of tool to help Tomura deal with the loss while simultaneously increasing his feelings of rage and hatred, which All for One believed was necessary for his plan to raise Tomura and his quirk's strength. As Tomura's memories of killing his own family were repressed by his subconscious, he became unaware of some aspects of his quirk, unconsciously holding himself back from causing more destruction than he was actually capable of. As his past began sorting itself through his mind due to damage caused by his family's hands, Tomura started relearning and showcasing how truly powerful Decay is while battling against the Meta Liberation Army. Decay is Tomura's main method of combat. By nature, this quirk forces him to always engage his opponent in close quarters, though he often requires to only make contact with his enemy in order to kill or heavily injure them. Tomura seems to have improved his quirk ever since its first appearance at the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, as Decay's disintegrating speed has become noticeably faster in subsequent usage. Tomura is often careful with his hands when touching objects he doesn't want to destroy, letting at least one of his fingers free from using while holding things. He employs a similar method when holding people hostage, threatening to disintegrate them if they don't comply or cooperate with him. If Tomura gets angry or frustrated, he is likely to drop his carefulness. Through vigorous training via several weeks of combat against Gigantomachia, Chimera has greatly improved the strength of his quirk. Decay works almost instantaneously now rather than taking several seconds before a target crumbles to dust, and continues to evolve under high stress environments. Using his hands, everything he touches is affected by Decay's spread, the function of which working in a solipsistic fashion where everything or anything connected to what he's touching suffers its effects. Even with his left hand partially destroyed, Chimera was able to decay part of Redestro's right index finger using only his left hand's 2 remaining digits, albeit the process was much slower and weaker compared to when he uses all 5 fingers. By the end of his fight with Redestro, Chimera grew yet again, and his decay is now strong enough to reduce nearly half a city to an ash cloud. After All for One's quirk was surgically grafted into Chimera's body, Decay became even stronger than before. Its speed and range of effect increased dramatically and was now not only able to spread the decay on touch. Just by simply placing his hand on the floor, Chimera was able to destroy Jakku Central Hospital while decaying everything inside, before spreading to a nearby city. It has grown to the point anything touched and disintegrated spreads the effect even after parts of the crumbling matter break away and touch someone. Chimera also has less control over what specifically gets affected by decay, as he was seen wearing X-Less's cape despite the hero being disintegrated. This enhanced control also allowed him to avoid disintegrating many of the Nomu in Dr. Garaki's laboratory, though he admits he couldn't save all of them. Despot. Despot is the quirk used by Dictator. Dictator's quirk allows him to puppeteer other people's bodies. He can control several dozen people at a time. His puppet soldiers retain their consciousness and free will, but are unable to break free of his control. The control is broken if the victims receive a strong jolt, or if Dictator himself gets knocked unconscious. Diesel Locomotive. Diesel Locomotive is the quirk used by Willy Wonka. Willy's quirk turned his head and his entire upper body into the locomotive of a diesel-powered train. This quirk is incredibly similar to Steam Locomotive. Dog. Dog is the quirk that's used by Ryo Inui and Gigantomachia. Dog gives Ryo an increased sense of smell to the point where he could tell how many people there were in the forest from outside. It also gives him the characteristics of a dog, including paws, claws, fur, and a long black nose. Nothing else is known about his quirk, but it's likely that it might increase his reflexes and strength. Gigantomachia's version grants him uncanny senses of hearing and smell. Double. Double was the quirk possessed by Jin Bubaigawara and the Nomu Mocha. Double allowed Jin to create a copy of anything, 2 at a time, through touch. With Double, he was able to produce replicas of anyone to provide support in numbers. In order to conceive a perfect clone, he required knowledge of precise measurements and physical features of the person or object he was replicating. Double possesses the same personality and abilities as the original, making it hard to distinguish them from the real person at a first glance. The copies only recall the memories of the last time they interacted with Jin himself. He had a limit of creating only 2 doubles at a time. However, because he was able to copy himself, and his copies also had access to Double, he was theoretically capable of producing infinite replicas of himself by letting his doubles duplicate themselves further. His creation speed was much faster for himself than for others. Even half-destroyed doubles can keep multiplying themselves as long as their arms are intact. This gave him the manpower to easily realize a large task or several smaller ones at once, provided that his doubles cooperated with him. Tomoyasu Chikazoku claimed that Double can even replicate dead people. While Jin himself didn't suffer any repercussions from his doubles being destroyed, he was still capable of detecting their destruction even if they were far away from his location. Jin needed a flawless image of whatever he planned to duplicate stored within his mind, so the measurements and physical features had to be extremely accurate. Without a perfect image, all Jin would get was a poorly formed copy that wouldn't last long. Therefore, every time a person undergoes any physical change, Jin has to take the measurements again. The copies were less durable and powerful than the real thing, dissolving into a viscous liquid after receiving enough damage, and a second copy is apparently even more fragile. According to Jin, physical injury equivalent to a broken bone is usually enough to extinguish a clone. Double had a major role in shaping Jin's character, to the point of making him insane. In the past, he initially used Double in order to cope with loneliness, since he had no friends or relatives to interact with, but he eventually devolved into criminal life, committing theft and robberies alongside copies of himself. In the past, Jin would abuse his copies to act as servants and follow his bidding. However, due to these doubles sharing the same personality as the original, who was lazy and overbearing, they disliked the slave work they were put into and eventually ended up rebelling against their creator, wrapping him with ropes. As each clone felt that they were the real Jin and the others were fakes, they started fighting amongst themselves, while Jin could only watch in horror as his own copies kept attacking and killing themselves repeatedly. Having suffered a traumatic experience with this particular event involving his quirk, Jin became afraid of using his ability on himself again. If he's left for long periods of time without covering his face with a mask, Jin, as he claims, will end up splitting himself, although it's unknown if he's referring to an actual physical consequence or just a metaphor for his multiple personality disorder. During the Meta Liberation Army arc, due to a strong desire to protect his comrades and receiving multiple injuries, which confirmed that he is in fact the original and not just a clone, Jin overcame his trauma, becoming willing to duplicate himself once more. His clones can be used for blood transfusion, as shown when Jin created a clone of Himiko to perform one and make up for the blood she had lost. Having no qualms in replicating others, Jin is a very useful asset to the League of Villains, as his quirk grants him a way to temporarily increase their numbers if they find themselves short-handed, giving the organization more subordinates to attack or distract enemies. Giron claims that Jin could potentially take over the entire country with his ability if used correctly. Because of this, Tamura Shigaraki considers Jin a vital part of his villainous goals, and the Meta Liberation Army has shown interest in drafting Jin into their own ranks. Jin has doubled the following people: himself, Dabi, Mr. Compress, Himiko Toga, Kendo Rappa, Tamura Shigaraki, Spinner, and Redestro. Jin usually reassured copies that they're nothing more than that, probably to prevent them from rebelling or feeling confused. Dragon. Dragon is the quirk used by Ryuko Tatsuma. Dragon allows Ryuko to transform into a dragon, a powerful mythological creature. This form grants her abilities commonly associated with dragons, including flight, powerful jaws, and claws. The activation of this quirk seems to be connected to the claw-like accessory on Ryuko's head. Ryuko's physical strength in this form allowed her to effortlessly block a punch from Rikiya Katsukame, a Yakuza member with superhuman strength, as well as restrain him and later to knock him back and hurt him despite having been weakened by his quirk, and despite the latter having shrugged off one of Nejire Hato's shockwaves. Her durability also increases considerably, allowing her to be hit with her trainee's most powerful attack without taking damage. It's worth noting that despite her form changing, Ryuko remains capable of grappling with the opponent, grabbing their hands with her claws, restraining them with submissions, and using her fangs as extra appendages in a hold. Dragon Breath. Dragon Breath is the quirk used by Drunk Lee. Dragon Breath allows Drunk Lee to expel fire from his mouth, and, similar to Sloshed, requires alcohol to be consumed beforehand. Dupli-Arms. Dupli-Arms is the quirk used by Meizo Shoji. Dupli-Arms grants Meizo a set of arm-like tentacles adjacent to his arms that can transform into duplicates of his other body parts. He's able to reproduce any of his body parts, including ears, eyes, mouths, hands, and so on, with each parts taking form through pods located at the tip of each of his tentacles. The duplicated parts are actually enhanced versions of the original ones, which improves Meizo's strength and senses. Different parts can be manifested at once too, allowing Meizo to combine his augmented sensory abilities. If for any reason one or several of the replicated body parts are cut off, Meizo can replicate it again once the injury is cured. The tentacles, just like any part of Meizo's body, are vulnerable to injuries coming from enemy attacks. The same goes for the replicated body parts. Although he can regrow any replicated body part that was cut off, it still is painful for him and takes time for the wound to heal. Dupli-Arms makes Meizo excellent for spying and stakeout missions, since his tentacle-created sensory parts have heightened functions. For instance, with his eye replicas, he has full peripheral vision that lets him see anything within a 360-degree field of view. And with his ear duplicates, he can detect sounds from sources behind walls or far away from his location. He also prefers to communicate with others through reproductions of his mouth, due to the fact that he's always wearing a mask that covers his lower face. For combat, he multiplies his already great physical strength by replicating his arms, giving him force equivalent to around half a ton with just one set of his tentacle arms. Meizo is strong enough to carry more than one person on his back with little trouble, and he is further capable of shielding or hiding them from dangers thanks to his Dupli-Arms having a webbed structure. This also means that the tentacles can function like improvised wings, letting him glide for a limited amount of time. The replicating pods, being part of Meizo's body, can recreate even themselves as well, meaning that it's possible for him to keep elongating his tentacles by making those pods self-replicate over and over. Additionally, one pod can reproduce multiple separate organs, but doing so takes away from some of Mezo's control over the duplicates, lessening their effectiveness. Dust. Dust is the quirk used by Konoko Haizono. Dust allows them to create ash-like dust from their body. She often uses it as a distraction, throwing dust at the eyes, nose, and mouth of her foes. However, if she overuses her quirk, her skin will become dry and rough. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.